So you met Max through this Wash U like alumni event?
Yeah. So I studied computational linguistics at WashU. I was very focused on linguistics and computer science academically, but career wise, I've been kind of more on the business side of tech startups for the better number of the last 5 years. So
Yeah.
I reached out to him, liked his experience, thought he seemed cool, and he had recently left Uber, I think. But yeah, he's working as like an operational consultant, and yeah, we catch up every once in a while.
That's cool. But you're still studying linguistics.
Yes, I'm about to start a grad program actually. It sounds random. If there's anything I've learned through my career, putting yourself in a direction that you want to go is the best thing you can do. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know exactly all of the end results I want from my career, but I think as long as I'm doing things that challenge me mentally, meeting interesting people, and just, you know, kind of going in a direction I want to go, I think that the end will kind of turn out the way I want.
No, I agree with that. So my first job was working for. I'm actually wearing the shirt, the Charlotte Hornets. I did like I don't know if you're familiar with like Moneyball, that
Yeah.
movie or book. Like I did that basically, and then I was like, oh my god, I hate working in sports. Like I want to leave, and so I actually went and did this. I was like, I'm gonna be an architect, just like not software related at all, like buildings, and I hadn't studied it or anything. So I went and did this bridge program. It was like a summer deal. It was like I had no idea why. I was just like, I just want to do this. And after looking into it more, I was just like, man, being an architect really sucks. Like,
Yeah.
definitely would never want to do this. But but the program itself was like really interesting, and the teacher was amazing, and there was like all these lessons for like building software that were in that, and yeah, I don't know. I've always taken that to be some sort of validation of just kind of like trust your gut and follow it. Although it could, be interpreted as like stop being like a dipshit millennial and just like doing random stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. That's cool.
Cool.
So
I mean,
so is the linguistic stuff, is it like you said it's computational linguistics?
so that was what I focused on in undergrad. My grad program is actually in linguistics, philology, and phonetics. So it's pretty general. I can focus on computational if I want, but the thing I'm most interested in is how we use language to convey meaning. So
Yeah.
semantics more so than anything.
Do you
I
have
mean,
any like
it's
do you have any like strong opinions about like the way that people are incorporating LLMs into their products right now?
yes and no. I mean, I think LLMs are a very helpful tool, but they're not gonna. I mean, we can only reach a certain point before we're at like an asymptote. If that makes sense. So I think the
Yeah.
limits to where LLMs are going are really in like the linguistic theory of how we construct meaning. So, a big
Yeah.
focus for engineering is like how these semantic embeddings are created, and mathematically how they're calculated. But I also think philosophically there's a deeper question we have to ask about like what it means to think and what it means to use words to convey what you're thinking as well. So I think that's in a limit. It's like humans have the ability to connect symbols to meaning, but I don't think that. Think about like a common sense task, for instance. Like you can hand me something, and without words, I kind of understand, or you can point at something and um,
Yeah.
convey meaning that way. LLMs can't really do that, and so I think that a lot of this stuff is statistical. It's prediction based. It's such a high dimension that we can't really understand it of pattern. It's just such a high dimensional pattern predictor that we can't really understand it. And the barrier that we're reaching is really in like the non-literal context creation and things like that. So I'm interested to study that. I don't know if it'll go anywhere really, but um, my gut kind of pushes me in that direction. I think it'll be pretty interesting to learn.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I've just seen so I've got a couple friends who are investors, and they do a lot of YC follow up deals,
Sure.
and so they're just looking at a lot of LLM stuff right now. Um, and then I'm sort of I think about it like in sort of two ways with regards to Flank. One is like, okay, where are places that it can help as like a Flank feature and just make the Flank, once you're in Flank and like doing stuff in there, like how can it make that experience smoother? But then I think what's more interesting is like, okay, once people start using LLMs to build, to like construct software systems, then are there certain applications, there's certain like use cases that, Flank is used for that will be like entirely swallowed by LLMs
I see. I see.
or like controlled by LLMs at a high level, let's say. Um, so, kind of thinking about like, I don't know, it's sort of like zoomed in on like specific pieces of Flank and then sort of zoomed out, like, Flank's sort of reason for existence in the first place and like how that relates to
Let's,
LLMs. But there's definitely a lot of, I mean, it's still early days and there's definitely a lot of like, let's just throw an LLM at everything. And like, you know, there's,
well, I
I
have
don't
to
know, people just,
separate like the theoretical and the applied side of my minds too. Like I'm so stoked about theory and just like being really abstract and philosophical and all this stuff. But when it comes to actual applications, I think they're very useful. Um, there's a lot of rhetoric going around on like Twitter about how all of these companies are LLM wrappers and like there's nothing novel and every company in YC's batch is an LLM wrapper. I don't think that's really fair. I think there are great applications of a lot of these LLMs in like SQL generation or helping Flank become a better tool for people. But I think the thing it's missing and the reason it's really lies in the reason that ChatGPT really changed everything for us is that like the user interface is the most important thing. Like if Flank can be a better user interface and help people do the thing that they're doing easier, then that's the answer. I don't think that you can just have a line that's saying like input your text here and then it'll create your entire, I mean, it could create your entire app or version of your app, but I don't think it can solve every process. It's like the example I would give is if you're using ChatGPT to code, for example, um, you have to have a base level of understanding of how to code to use that code effectively and to actually deploy the code and to build something. And so looking at a lot of no code tools from like right before ChatGPT came out, a lot of the emphasis was on how the drag and drop creator looks, how much of it's no code versus low code, what's your audience that you're catering to, and how big is that audience, and then where can you go from there. At the pre-seed stage, when you just have like an MVP, or even after that, you have a V1 product. Um, there's so many different directions you can go. So based on what your ideal customer is doing and what they want, you can kind of build towards a greater TAM down the road. From the very beginning, you don't have to have a product that caters to, you know, 3 billion people because maybe only 100 million people know what LLMs are right now, or 200 million people. And then in the next 5 to 10 years, the next 6, 7 billion will. So,
yeah, I mean, thinking about UI versus text, and there's like the Rune line that it's like text is the universal interface. I don't think he came up with that, but I don't know. He says it a lot, and like you can imagine like OpenAI releasing a version of ChatGPT that has better UI built on top of it for specific ChatGPT applications.
right,
Maybe it's like a file uploader or something for asking questions about like an Excel document, and I think like that would obviously be better than the current version of ChatGPT for that specific task, and you can just sort of take that idea to its limit and it's like, okay, yeah, there's a point at which like UI sort of blended with the chat interface is like what's going to be most valuable. And
right.
it's not going to be OpenAI that necessarily builds it all, or chat GPT like bootstrapping itself and building it all. Like there's just going to be other people and other companies that go out and build that stuff.
Yeah.
um
I mean, it
so
would be
yeah.
cool to see like a one general purpose AI that the world can contribute to open source. I mean, Facebook had their Llama 2 that's seeing some success, but right now there's a couple major players, right? You have like Anthropic, OpenAI, and like Cohere, or not Cohere. Yeah, yeah, I think. And they're generating these like private open source models and things like that. But then you also you have private models and then you have the open source models, and GPT-4 is getting better and better, but I don't think open source is going to lag behind for long. So I think eventually, we will get to that point where LLM development is open source, like a lot of other software is right now. I think that's the trend things are moving, sort of like a Wikipedia.
So do you understand? So a question I have on that is like I've seen the hype around Llama and some of the other open source stuff, and like it performs very closely. But then the way it's also been explained to me is that like the whole reason that these models work so well is that they're just throwing an insane amount of compute at it, and they just have a gazillion different parameters in this model. And so like how do you reckon those two things, because they seem opposed in my
It's
mind?
funny. It's like I said before. Sorry, hang on, got a call. It's funny. Like I said before, it's a real balance of theory versus application, because if you look at the academic, scratch that for a second. Think about academia versus like building a company. When
Yeah.
you're building a startup, you're moving so fast. You're shipping 6 things a week. You're like learning, rapidly experimenting, growing, iterating, whatever. In academia, papers can take years to push out. I think that academic papers are lagging behind uh, where the actual practice is going, and so it's really funny. I don't remember what paper it was. I think it was GPT-3 paper, maybe from OpenAI, but or maybe it was one of the Facebook papers. I don't know, but there was a paper where I read a line that was literally like, "We don't know why this works. We have to attribute it to like divine intervention." It's like under the hood, there are certain things we do know about how these models work, but when you get to parameters of like the size that GPT-3, GPT 3.5, and GPT-4 are at, it's impossible to know everything that's going on under the hood. Like there could be different relationships in the language that we use that we don't understand because it's just natural to us. It's like the mechanisms of our brain just get it.
Yeah.
Um, but the computer is able to abstract it to 180 million or 180 billion parameters of uh, numbers, something like
So
that.
basically, you're saying open source will just naturally have more experimentation and like a higher iteration speed, just because it's one company versus the field, and like you would bet on the iteration speed and sort of something new emerging theoretically over just betting on the scale of GPUs and huge data centers.
I think scale can only go so far. I mean, we have like the reason GPT is so successful. It's a generative pre-trained transformer. The transformer is a certain type of architecture for these models, and I don't know if it's the best. There was a paper called "Hungry Hungry Hippos" released by Stanford, and it's like a different type of model. I don't remember the exact difference, but there's a slight difference. It's like a variation on the transformer model where you trade off some of that. Um, like certain performance on tasks for speed and optimization, and so you can train a model with less compute and different things like that. So I think a lot of this research is really in its infancy, and there will be a lot of change over the next couple of years. I am not an expert on it, though. I want to make that very clear. Like I am very early
Yeah.
in my learning. Like I'm getting a master's in linguistics. It's very different than like Stanford AI researchers and things like that. Like I'm using it just like you are. I have a better understanding of the linguistic side of things, but I think even still, like very basic for what
Yeah. I
what I
mean,
could.
I don't know. Yes and no. It's like nobody understands all of it, right? It's like it's too
Sure.
big for anyone's head to wrap around. So I don't know. I feel like the best we can do is just like talk about it a little bit and like contribute to the conversation. And I don't know. You're contributing to it more intelligently than most people I talk to. So
I appreciate it. I hopefully I'm not making any heinous mistakes. If we do end up posting this podcast and I make a mistake, please help me. Because all I'm doing
um
is to learn. You know.
yeah. So with the linguistics thing, like do you have some gut feeling of like it going in the direction of like AI stuff and like sort of like this intersection with computation, or is there like like a 50% chance that you end up as like a, I don't know, like studying like the history of words and like manuscripts
I don't think it'll be like that. I mean, I'm interested in computational linguistics, but I'm also interested in meaning, and that can
Yeah,
really go anywhere. Like the forefront of where syntax and semantics research is at. I mean, there's a million different things you can study. You know, you can study any different language. You can like, linguistics itself is the study of language. It's not learning languages necessarily, but um, I can study how companies are using sales copy to sell people more effectively. You know,
right.
and I think that's what's interesting for me. I had this moment of like, I love growth. I think user acquisition, engagement, and retention are really interesting things, especially at growing startups. Language is one of the most powerful things. I think the best way to say it is clear language has the power to convey the most profound knowledge. You can really, if you can convey something concisely in a way that someone can really easily understand it, you can help them distill a very complex topic down to something a fifth grader can understand. And that's where the power in LLMs is for me, is like it not only
Yeah.
helps me do things, but it also helps me understand things. So I think the barrier to research, the barrier to knowledge is being decreased with these tools.
Yeah. I feel like I've like very deeply absorbed this lesson. It's almost like a proof by negation through like all the like bad sales calls and like super lengthy explanations I've had. And then sometimes when it clicks, it's just like, wow, that was like, what just
Yeah.
happened? That was crazy.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is really just having a hypothesis, having conviction behind that hypothesis and going deep on it. And if you figure out it doesn't work, then moving on to the next one.
Yeah.
Um, it's that simple. I think you can use a lot of buzzwords for that, but it's all about figuring out like where the people who want to use your product are. If you're building a company, or if you're shouting down a certain rabbit hole in academia, if something isn't returning the results that you want or that you expect, then you kind of go to a different direction as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So we've got like a kind of a tentative agenda here. Like you wanted to ask me about the brand. I'm kind of just curious, like what I'm kind of curious to learn more, a little bit more about like your thesis too, with Ramp and some of these other companies and how you think that's gonna
Yeah.
proliferate. Maybe just start there, and then I'm also curious just to get your perspective on some of our trials and tribulations as well. But
Yeah.
yeah, do you wanna like explain the Ramp thesis to me again?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just Ramp, but there's a lot of companies that are being built right now. I think if you look back at the last recession, like 2008, 2009, a lot of these huge tech companies were built in that recession. And the way
Yeah,
that they grew follows that Facebook 2012 model, very similar to like building growth pods and kind of going deep on certain things and being either product led or sales led. But I think that the best companies today are being built by a combination of both. So product led growth, sales led growth. Um, you're building a great product that's meant for people, and whether you're a B2B, B2C, D2C, whatever, a marketplace, an enterprise focused company or whatever, you're selling to people at the end of the day, even if it's a beverage or if it's a fintech product. And so a lot of the best companies being built right now are doing a combination of both. They're super hyper focused on their customer, like their ideal customer. um, they're engaging with them at scale as much as they can, and they're experimenting. They're running a lot of tests rapidly, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, and just trying to ship as much as possible. I know I've listened to a couple of podcasts with the heads of growth at Ramp and Deal and Rippling and a couple places like that, and a lot of them really focus on velocity. And yeah, velocity is awesome. It's not everything, but if you can build a great foundation and then start diving deep on certain sides of your business, I think that that's the next generation way to grow cheaply at scale effectively.
yeah. Do you think the PLG versus direct sales dichotomy is that just an outdated model? Was it like a false dichotomy to begin with? Like what do you think of
Mm,
that?
Not necessarily. I think it depends on how expensive your product is also. Like there are certain factors like that that can deter people.
Yeah.
Like certain companies can't offer a free trial. Certain companies can. Um, I think like with B2C, another example is B2C is like pretty impossible to just do cold outbound. You know, if you're trying to just sell to as many people as possible, like let's say you're a beverage brand, a lot of that's going to be like influencer. You're not going to invest in your like salespeople that are doing cold outbound because you have to have one solid salesperson who's like getting the distribution to go into grocery stores.
Yeah.
Versus a B2B product, you know, you'll have salespeople kind of pushing it out to different companies. Maybe you're building a great product that gets people talking. Um, and that, you know, that works for whether your product's expensive or cheap. But I think you need a mix of both. I think there are ways to implement both product led and sales led growth channels, and I don't think it's outdated though. I think it's foundational, and depending on the stage your company's at, you can focus on one more than the other. But I think there needs to be a mix.
Yeah, it's always struck me as, I mean, what you're saying is like we sort of need both, and they feel self reinforcing in a way where, you know, if you have something that is easy to onboard onto, it's easy to use, like that's a really good tool that you can use on a sales call, because now you don't have to be like, well, tell me like this, that. You can just be like, ah, our website's this, you know, they pull it up on their own. They can like go, they're like, oh, this is cool. I'm like, oh, you're on the website, you know?
Yep.
And then like on the flip side, like, yeah, I just think like you have to, if you're gonna meet people where they are, like you have to like reach out to them and like send them emails and or get on LinkedIn or like whatever it is. Um, and yeah, like if some of your customers are just not out there, you know, on Twitter, like trying every new tool, it's like you kind of need to like get in front of them somehow.
Yeah. Well, it's I'm trying to figure out the best way to like term it. You know what I mean? Like it's not just a mix of product led growth and sales led growth. It's not just product led sales. Like that's something too. I think it's more like authenticity led growth where you know
Mm,
you're focusing on building a product that people actually want. um, you know, and you're
yeah,
making your product as great as it can be. You're pumping the gas on sales too, but at the end of the day you're doing things that don't scale as scalably as you can. You know, if you look at like I use the Ramp example, amazing company. um, they have their C-suite people responding to people's tweets on Twitter. They have
yeah,
all people at the company on LinkedIn, like responding when people are having issues with their competitors or have a question and they just answer it. They focus on solving rather than selling. And that's how the best companies are built, hyper customer centric.
yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. So that doesn't even seem like a. That seems like it's almost just on a different dimension than PLG versus direct sales. It's just,
Right.
it's like you're just existing on a different plane, and then it's sort of depending on like where you are on that plane, like it'll intersect in different ways with like
I guess
PLG and sales. I know it's like very abstract, but it's like
yeah,
yeah, you work backwards from the customer, and then it's like it just kind of is what it is. Like
exactly. Yeah. I mean, you have your customers, you figure out what makes them the happiest, and then you dive deep on that. It's almost like product and sales happen in the background. They're going to happen anyway, but the way that you inform your approach is what the customers are actually saying. And so that's why I think that the product manager role has been so big in the last like 10 years. Um, I think things are changing though, and people are having elements of product in every role. Like to me, for example, growth is a mix between product and marketing centering around data. I think there's connection to sales. It's not so much like a sales role. I mean, it can be depending on the company you're at. Um, but that's how I see it. And a lot of these individual roles now, like you have product marketing, you have some teams will call growth just it's like a salesperson, but they're focused like on connecting to marketing more so.
yeah,
Um, Different companies do it differently.
yeah. The authenticity thing is really interesting. There's a guy I've become friends with in Austin. His name is Tim Woods, and he used to work at Datafold, and now he works at a company that competes with Nielsen, like Nielsen ratings. But
Sure.
he does sales. He like started his career at Oracle, and he's just a hilarious dude with a lot of like funny hot takes on stuff. But like one of the things that he always says is like he's like we're at like a best practice singularity when it comes to sales, where it's like every best practice has been exhausted, and anytime that there's some alpha in something, like it just immediately gets used up and then it disappears like 3 months later. And he's like the only thing that's left is just like being authentic and like just trying to like help people.
Yeah.
Just
Well, I mean,
like sounds like cheesy in a way, but it's just like a funny, just kind of like exasperated sales guy outlook.
I don't remember who said it, but somebody said growth is just marketing for dudes, and like I totally agree. Uh, you can't replace authenticity. Like authenticity, it's not a moat, but I mean, it is. You know, if people love your company, they're going to talk about it, and there's nothing more powerful than word of mouth. If you
Yeah.
can build a company authentically at scale, there will be nothing stopping you from becoming $1 billion plus company. So I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that. I just lost my train of thought. But yeah, I mean, hmm,
I think I don't know. I think it's a good theory. Just the sort of, not PLG or direct sales, but just like this authenticity, focus on customer.
yeah. I mean, you want to do everything you can to collateralize your business in a way, right? So,
What do
you
you
know,
mean by that?
so I'm big on the authenticity. This is kind of where I was going and I lost my train of thought. But a lot of B2B companies just sleep on the messaging. On your last podcast, you were talking about messaging and defining that early messaging to get to your ICP. Um, that's so important. If you can increase the surface area of your marketing collateral, like help people understand what your business is everywhere you can,
Yeah.
create content like your podcast, for example, podcast. If you can do written content, if you can be on social media, if you can be in every circle at once, obviously you would. It's not easy to do, but finding a way to maximize that and educating people without selling them is immensely powerful. So that kind of connects. I mean, it's like that's how you're going to get pipeline. That's how you're going to get a constant drip of pipeline is if you can build that early collateral, then you can scale massively.
Yeah, the podcast has been interesting, and I think it actually validates aspects of your thesis. So
I
when
did want to
we
ask about it when when I reached out.
when we started doing it, well, first of all, Bryce and our intern Trevor had been like pushing to do that or something like it for a while, and I was a little bit like, it just feels like this weird self-indulgent, like we're just talking about ourselves, like putting stuff out into the void, like who cares, type of thing. And then so I actually talked to Max about it, and he I think like reframed it very clearly in my mind with his experience at Incredible Health, where
Sure.
they use the podcast basically just as a way to have conversations with CMOs. So this was a company that was, I don't know if you've talked to them about Incredible Health, but they do on-demand nursing staffing.
Mm-hmm.
And basically they started this podcast. They'd have CMOs on. All these CMOs would be like, you want me to be on a podcast, and then they just talk to them for like an hour, and then those people would be like, oh, like those were nice guys, and then like down the road, like a lot of them ended up converting into customers.
Yeah.
And like sort of like the mechanics of that made sense to me, because it's like, okay, actually it's not about top of funnel, it's just about having a conversation with someone, and sort of like in this setting that's more about them than about you. And like a podcast is very much like about the guest. And like even when you get coffee with someone, or like there's always a little bit of like, like why do you want to talk to me again? Like everyone's got their guard up like a little bit. um and so that made more sense to me. And so anyway, we started doing it, and like pretty quickly, what first I was surprised at how many people listened to it. Like I think last month we had more podcast listens than like web page visits, which is like
Whoa.
mind blowing to me.
Cool.
both numbers were pretty low, but it's just like I'm surprised. I'm just surprised that like people were like taking the time to listen to it as opposed to, like just go to the webpage or read a blog article or something like that. It was like something about that medium was like working better. Um, and then also people seem like definitely the most interested in kind of like startup troubles, like what's going on with the startup, what are you dealing with right now? What are you guys struggling with? Just like they wanted
Yeah.
like the real scoop, you know what I mean? Um, Especially because like, most startup podcasts are like these after the fact, glorifications of the
Yeah,
early
like
days.
after you've gotten to 400 million ARR, let's talk about how you grew in the early days, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I just feel like there's like there's definitely like this thirst out there for like the authenticity angle,
Yeah. I mean, that's my whole thing. When I was an undergrad, I mean, I had a lot of friends who were business majors, and they were, sorry about the noise, some vacuuming going
Okay.
on. They were very focused on like networking for the purpose of getting a job. And I think through my
Yeah.
career, especially during COVID, this is something I tried to do, is just message people to like learn about them and learn about why they're doing their thing, what's their thesis for how they live their life. And for me, I don't think you can bullshit someone for an hour straight when talking to them. I think there will be small things that they can pick up where they
Yeah.
kind of who you are, how you do how you live your life as a person, and they get a sense of you. Um, I think it's hard. I mean, people are a little less willing to hop on the phone now because they assume you have ulterior motives because the job market's hard and there's a bunch of other things going on. They assume you want to raise money or deploy money if you're an investor. Um, but sometimes I just want to talk to people. I think getting coffee with people is wildly underrated. Um, Not being in a hub though is very hard. Like you're in Austin, I'm in Southern California. For us to grab a cup of coffee would be pretty impossible. So
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you reached out, by the way. Um, I
anyway,
didn't,
I did want to. I
maybe
did
I'm just
want
naive, but I didn't feel like you had some sort of motive. So
to. No, not really. I mean, I do want to learn about the company. I'm just curious, as like a 3 to 4 person company, to turn the tables on you, how you're thinking
yeah.
about user acquisition, retention, how you're kind of honing in on that ideal customer early on.
So yeah, so we were like, I think very lucky to make a sale very early on, and we had like almost nothing. With this company that is they're like a bank in an exchange for baseball cards. So it's like a very operational managed marketplace type of thing. Consignment marketplace, whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
And they've just got like the classic internal tooling problem. They've got like this physical process they're dealing with. They have baseball cards coming in the door. They're pulling them out of boxes. They're grading them. They're putting them into binders. They're putting them on shelves. They're shipping them out to people. They're doing extra levels of like authentication and price matching and like all this other stuff.
Right.
And there's just a gazillion little edge cases around that, especially as they like experiment with new business processes, new markets. Like it's just like this constant challenge for like the software to keep pace with sort of what's going on the warehouse floor, um, and vice versa. Like when something new comes out, whatever, on the software side. And so yeah, they don't use Retool. They actually use Microsoft Access, which sounds crazy, but
Hmm.
they use Microsoft Access basically exactly like Retool, right? It's like sort of like a way to just sort of mash up data and some programming and things like that. But it's like not really fast enough for them. Like they kind of want like another gear and sort of like another prototyping layer. And so like basically the way they use Flank is it's like anytime that an engineer gets like a request for a query or like a little feature or something like that, like they just write some SQL and then they deploy it, and then it just like shows up in Flank as like a little button that someone can click, and then they
Yep.
can share that thing with somebody. like really quickly. So from an engineer's point of view, it's like, oh, I get a request from ops, I write some SQL, I go into Flink and I just click, share with Zach or whatever. Um, and then kind of like the way I think about it is like they're taking they're taking the fixed cost of UI down to zero. So now they get like UI for everything. And so that way there's never this like dilemma of like, is this a one-off request? Should I build a tool for it? Like this or that. It's like there's always just like they always get like a simple tool for everything.
Sure.
And I'll just stop there. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, totally.
And so yeah, we've just spent like a decent amount of time just building out that use case and like making that really really simple and like fluid for them. It's
So like
been
an additional prototyping layer, one step from where Microsoft Access is.
yeah
Okay.
yeah and like and it might help to explain like the way things operated before. Like the way it was before is like something would come across an engineer's desk, and a lot of the times they would just solve it on a one-off basis. They just execute some SQL or write the query, whatever, send the data back, and then they'd get caught in this pattern of doing that thing over and over again. So it's like it's a one-off, but then all of a sudden you've done it for the 10th time. You're like, why am I still doing this? So just like the gatekeeper problem.
Yeah.
Or they would build a tool for it, put it in their app, like the thing would never get used. Then it's like cluttering up the app. Nobody knows where to find it. It's like the next time they come back and they still ask the developer for it. And also they had like a weekly release cadence on their Access apps. Like if someone could ask for something, today, it could get fixed tomorrow, but then they wouldn't actually like get the thing in their hands for like another 6 days or something like that.
Right.
So then that's another, I think, big piece of it is just sort of like circumventing their whole like, front end release cycle and just being able to just do something on the back end and then immediately expose it. And so, yeah, we basically just like set out cold emailing people. Just didn't work at all. Just got like, just like completely stonewalled. And I'm trying to think of like the full
What was the
iteration of what was the what?
I'm curious, like what was the setup that you had for your cold emailing?
Oh, like what tools do we use?
Yeah.
What is it called? We used well, for a while we used GMass, then we used Apollo, and I don't think we've used anything since then. We've used like a LinkedIn automation tool more recently that I don't remember the name of, but it's like one of those things that you just give it a list of people and like it friends them automatically and like pings them.
This is a tough challenge for sure. I think nailing down who that ideal customer is and then figuring out the exact messaging that they want is a very difficult challenge, but it just takes a lot of trial and error. I've worked with an early B2B SaaS company who is setting up that like early automation, and the key is finding some level of personalization where you get across the not the finish line, but you get people to open it, you get people to engage with it. Um, I'm not a sales guy, but I'm learning a lot of this stuff too because I think growth does touch that sales, and if you can find ways to have those wins early on, like finding, for example, finding similar companies to that trading card company you mentioned a second ago, figuring out which engineers at the company specifically would want a product like that, like based on the problems that they have. And early on, maybe you're getting really personal, like you personally are emailing a specific engineer. The email's really personal. But then once you figure out the messaging that they want to hear, you can try and scale up a little bit. Maybe use Apollo to send 10 emails per week or something like that. There's a lot of backend stuff that needs to happen. Like you need to warm up your inbox and make sure you're not sending too many to get spam rejections and things like that. But a lot of it early on is nailing down who your best customers are going to be, getting from 1 to 10 to 100, and then scaling up from there.
Yeah, and we definitely don't have that. And like we've kind of gone through we've gone through like different cycles of like, okay, let's write 10 emails by hand, and then see how that goes, and sort of
It takes a lot of time.
use that to, I know, and then you're like, shit, like let's just get a little more scale. So you're like, all right, let's just send like 50 of like what we think is the best one. Like it doesn't work, and you're like, oh man, like okay, like let's just try like a totally different thing. You set another 50, and then go back to the drawing board. You start writing them by hand again. One thing that I think was like kind of interesting. It was just like more of an observation rather than like something that was really like a learning or like a step forward for us. But all the tools like Apollo are really geared around like finding the role and then emailing a bunch of people at different companies like in a certain role. And if you look at like the LinkedIn Sales Navigator page, it's got like this Kanban board where you can kind of like drag people onto it, and it's like much more organized around like start with a company and then like pull a bunch of different people onto the page,
Right.
and it's more kind of like company oriented, and you can obviously do like either approach in either tool, but I just thought it was kind of interesting how like the interface of one kind of sort of steers you in one direction, whereas the interface of the other like steers you in a different direction. And something
Well,
that we've sorry, go ahead.
for your product, it's going to be a lot harder than, if you're selling a corporate card or like a payroll tool. For those, you can reach out to the CEO or the CFO or something. But for yours, if you're trying to reach specific engineers or like engineering teams, you really just have to find out where they hang out online. A tool like Apollo might not be the best for cold emailing them. I mean, if you
Yeah.
want to reach small companies so that you can help them, like let's say your ICP is a small company, like a head CTO or a head of engineering in a small company, you can run your cold email like that. So you abstract to size of company, the role, but it's going to be really hard to build a list that you can scale up to 1,000 emails a week or a month or whatever it might be, if you're just targeting role, because your product is specific to engineers, and every engineer has a different flow. So one example is like Loom for me. I think their growth channel of like the share button is amazing. People use Loom very differently. They use it for like demos. They use it for sharing updates to their team,
Yeah.
etc. And being able to create that like viral channel within different communities is like an epic channel if you can figure that out. Like for me, like Notion, the first time I ever used Notion, I was working at a company and they were using it to like store all their docs. Now I use it for everything. Same thing with Loom. I mean, I use it to film videos of all kinds. I mean, there's not that many kinds of videos, but I when I'm working and things like that, there's I can show someone my screen really easily, and it makes my life a lot easier. Um, if you share it with an engineering team at a company and then they go to their next company, that could be a huge growth channel for you. If you just make it someone's like home base for their like their tool belt for internal tool development or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I 100% agree. And well, I'm trying to sort of piece together this story. Where do you want me to Where do you want me to keep going on this? Because there's a couple of directions I could go from here.
So, what foundational work did you do early on? Because I mean, you guys are doing a lot of different things. You have an engineering heavy product. It seems like, from what I've seen on LinkedIn and then what you've told me, like a pretty engineering heavy team. But you guys are, killing the podcast game, and you're out on LinkedIn doing outbound. Uh, when you're a 3-person company, you do have to focus on certain things, and there's certain things that fall to the wayside. How have you prioritized different projects that you work on?
From a product point of view, it's been pretty straightforward the whole time. I think we're 3 engineers, and like we know the product, and um, I think we've all at various times and in various ways like experienced the problem ourselves. So I feel like
Right.
on the engineering side and like on the product side, we've sort of had this vision the whole time, and like it hasn't really changed at all in like 2 years, and like we've basically built. I think we've done a good job sort of constantly having this feeling of like we really need like these 3 more features. You know what I mean? Like the
Right.
product is always like lacking to some extent, but not like super glaringly. But I don't think we haven't. I guess what I'm trying to say is like we haven't, spent like 3 months like building some feature and then been like, oh shit, like that was such a waste. Like we're kind of like always getting a little bit of pull from somebody. The challenge has been like getting that pull, and on that side, I'm just like sales, distribution, marketing, like whatever you want to call it. Like we've gone through just like a bunch of different ideas, tried a bunch of different stuff. Um, and in terms of how we've prioritized, I think we've sort of looked. It sort of feels like we've like looked at one thing at a time, tried it for a while, like intensely, and then we're like, let's move on to like something else. Like we've had, like 2 month stretches where we've just done cold outbound, and we're like, not working. Like go on to something else. But then it also feels like kind of the next time that we come back and try cold outbound again, like it's a little better. So it does feel like, the loop is like tightening a little bit, like
Yeah.
almost like imperceptibly slowly. Um, as like one other thing kind of informs it, but that's kind of how we've done it. Like, for we did cold outbound, then for a while we were like, okay, it'd be really cool if in our cold outbound, we could show people more of like what the product looks like. So then
Sure.
we made like our, whatever you want to call them, like apps, pages, tools, dashboards, whatever. We made them like publicly exposable. And so kind of like in a, how in like a Google sheet, you can just say like share with
Share
anyone
with
with
them.
this link or whatever. We added like that feature basically, and like tried putting that in for a while, sort of like tried showing stuff to people. Then that like didn't really work. So went back and did more cold outbound, like struggled to like, had some good like sales conversations with the right companies, but we were like really struggling to explain the value prop. And it just feels like, okay, the one thing that really seems to work is, showing people lots of examples. So now we're just like, okay, let's just get a bunch of people using it and like build up some case studies and like put that out there. And I'm sure we'll run into a point where we're like, this isn't working, or we're not growing fast enough or whatever. And we switch back to some
Yeah.
other channel. But
Well, for Loom, it was that user generated content, right? If you can find a way to get people in Flink creating and doing that for you,
so
then that
that, yeah. And like that is, I, I think that's sort of like the way we're really thinking about it now. And I didn't mean to cut you off if you had another thought there.
no, no, I want to fuel your fire. I like the listening.
But yeah, like I think like by far the most powerful force that we can harness is just other people's creativity.
Right.
Um, and I mean, Flank is just, it's like a stupidly simple tool. It just looks at code and just like creates a button for that code. And so it's kind of this question of like, okay, how are people going to use that? And yeah, I think our challenge right now is really like getting people to use it, and sort of getting like some like really creative people sort of behind it, who are thinking to themselves like, okay, how can I use Flank in this situation? How can I use it in that situation? And like using it to, then build tools that other people are using. And then once those people use it, then they're like, oh, this is cool. Maybe I'll use it. And in some ways, like it kind of gets away from the internal tooling use case, which is a little scary, because it's like, okay, we have this customer, they kind of feel like, our ICP, we've got like a nice contract with them. This feels like, the way to build the company. But then I don't know, like my gut feeling is more like the way that people adopt tools is by, having a tool shared with them, and like that, seeing someone else using it, and like seeing someone like be really creative with it, and like, one really creative person like pushing this thing as far as they can, and less so, a bunch of people in their job just kind of using it because they have to.
Right.
So that, I think that's probably like a false dichotomy in my mind, and like it's all interconnected, and like we should just push it more. But
It is all
I don't know.
interconnected. I mean, everything you should be doing, or everything you're doing, is building trust. So whether it's marketing efforts, sales efforts, you're making a sale where someone recommends to their friend, like that's all
Yeah.
trust behind your brand. I mean, the authenticity side that I mentioned earlier, that's all trust too. That's a great way to connect with people and build product evangelists that'll share Flank with anybody.
Yeah.
Finding the perfect way to do it is difficult early on, but it takes a lot of experimentation. Um, the difficulty, especially with a small team, is there are a lot of efforts that have to happen for a long time to get you the results. Like there are a few quick wins you can get by doing sales. Like let's say you make one sale, it's very clearly like a revenue driver for you. You have a direct connection to the bottom line. When you're doing marketing efforts or content marketing or SEO, it might be difficult to see the impact right away. But you're like I said earlier, like collateralizing your brand. You're making it so people land on your page. You're making it so that people can engage with Flank in a way where they're curious. Um, there's no perfect answer to it, but it does all connect because you're building that trust. If you think of a marketing funnel, you have like your top of funnel activities, which is like generating traffic to the website. You want to be able to, like, upon first engagement with Flank, have someone very easily understand what it is. Maybe they're
Yeah.
interested, maybe they want to come back to it, or they send it to their friends, say, hey, I saw this cool thing, what do you think about it? Maybe they're in the middle of funnel and you can kind of engage with them a little bit. Maybe they gave you their email, maybe you provided a tool that they land on your landing page or something like that. Like Flank built a template or something for this type of engineer to build their CI/CD workflow easier or something. Landing page, boom, they're the right audience for you. They're educated on the topic and they're marketing qualified. So they're a, a lead that's early in their life cycle before they close, and you want to get to them to the next point, which is being sales qualified. So whatever it means to you to have a sales qualified lead, getting them from point A to point B, is that education side, is that engagement with your product, is giving you their email or whatever it is. And then at the bottom of the funnel, it's more sales focused activities like providing them with a landing or not a landing page, a one pager, or hopping on the phone with someone and doing a demo, or removing all frictions and making it so that they can sign up for a free trial and using the product themselves, and then maybe converting to a paid customer and stuff like that. So a lot of different
Yeah.
activities to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what we're seeing. I think what you're describing is like the same thing I'm describing, where I'm like, we try this, we focus on this for a while, then we focus on this for a while, then we focus on this for a while, and then eventually we come back to this. And like the next time we come back to this, like it's actually like a little better. Let me go back to this. It's a little better the next time. And
How do
yeah,
you
I don't
how
know.
do you plan? Like how do you strategize for running an experiment?
Mm, I think we've done a variety of ways. I think we're pretty. I think we've been kind of all over the spectrum when it comes to process. And I think like one thing I think we've done a good job of actually is like implementing a process and then like completely scrapping it. So we haven't had like that many zombie like processes that we've been following for too long. But we've kind of gone we've done everything from like, you know, like let's test all these different things in a cold email, put them in a table, sort of grade them on like how well they performed, to sort of like very high level, let's sort of compare, me reaching out through my network versus Bryce going to meetups in Philly
Sure.
versus yeah, I don't know, like all the different kind of like high level stuff that we've tried, like putting that together. Then sort of on the other end of the spectrum, just kind of like talking to people and like not thinking about it. To be honest, like the less like sort of like thought out stuff seems to like work better in a way. Be my
It's like networking,
um,
like making
be my
friends.
thesis. Yeah,
The less motive you have for something, the less salesy it is. Usually, the better impact it'll have on people. It's like if someone asks a question on Twitter and you give them the answer instead of saying, "Hey, you should check out Flank." They're gonna appreciate that. I mean, it's not a direct impact. Maybe they're not a customer tomorrow, but they'll remember that you answered their question. And if you
yeah,
can keep doing stuff like that or make friends in the space, word of mouth just goes so far.
yeah, yeah. I think that's yeah, and I think that's definitely something that I think we struggled with early on when we just had less confidence as a company too. You know, it's like when you're not as confident, it's a little bit like this is our shot, you know,
But
which just, diminishes the quality of every interaction that you have.
yeah,
Um,
the good thing
but
with you guys is it's not like you're not an engineering team building a technical tool. You know, you're an engineering team building a tool for engineers to build better.
it's
And
true.
so, you know, your understanding of your problem is much better than it would be for like if you brought on a business person who's never written a single line of code. And so if you can get that sales process down to a science, then that's when you can scale up your sales team and keep it
Yeah.
more cold outbound, like just trying to sell someone an email kind of thing, versus like the very intimate, personalized communications that you're doing now.
Yeah. And that's something that we've talked about. And like my attitude has always been, like we, especially me, need to like own sales results. And, if we bring in a salesperson and just say like, figure it out, like that's just, I don't know, I think poor leadership in a lot of ways. Um, but then also I think at times I've been like a little too dogmatic on that front. And it's like, there's actually like a lot you can learn from salespeople and, the best practices that they've got. So for a while there, I was just trying to like talk to salespeople and just be like, hey, would you tell me like what you do all day?
If there's anyone
um,
that's easy to get on the phone, it's a salesperson.
yeah, that too, that too.
Yeah, awesome.
But yeah,
So, so what's your priority then for the next quarter? I guess before the end of the year, what are you trying to go deep on? You're running this
uh,
podcast. You know, you're boosting your distribution.
well, so the podcast is actually at a point where it was definitely like an upfront investment, but it's at a point where it's not like taking up too much of our time. And one thing that sort of like the ideal that we're going for is like we should never be like doing a podcast. It's like we should just sort of be like living, and then just like hitting the record button and like putting that stuff out there. And we're getting like closer to that, I think, which has been good. So it's that piece isn't like a huge time suck. I think the main thing that we're just focused on right now is like just getting more people to use the product and demonstrating more use cases. And a lot of it is stuff that doesn't scale super well. So, like our product in an abstract sense sits between a software engineer and a non-engineer. And in order to just get more people using it, like sometimes we're just playing the role of software engineer and like doing a little consulting, helping someone write like a little scraper or a data like enricher, like whatever it is that they need, and then just giving them that tool through Flank, um, which I don't know, like takes time, but also seems like it's just been like a good source of like learnings, and it's just a much easier. It's sort of like we're just making the sale as easy as possible on ourselves, and like making the other stuff more difficult. Putting more of a burden on the engineering side, which feels like a good trade-off. And then, if we get good at that, then we can sort of like, make the sale a little harder and take a little pressure off the engineering side. But that's kind of how we're thinking about it right now. It's just help people build little tools, step in as engineers if we need to, do a little consulting.
I mean, that's
Try,
that's definitely an audience you can reach. Is those people like those early startups or teams that don't have as much engineering as they need, and
yeah,
then you jump in, help them out for a bit, get them excited about the product, and then make them feel like Flank is their only tool that they can use.
you cut out there for a second. What'd you say?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an audience you can reach. Reaching that side of a team that doesn't have as much engineering ability, and then getting them excited about Flank for a different reason.
Yeah, one thing that we've always this has been kind of like the eternal. So I remember there was this for a while. I worked in this WeWork-esque place, and I was by myself. I was remote, but I sat next to this company that did some sort of real estate software, and they were like building. They were building this real estate platform, and they were also doing real estate investments. And I sat with the grunts, and sort of like all the other people sat in a different part. And so I would get like all the, like water cooler talk. It's like, what are we doing? And like the, like the eternal debate was like, are we an investment company, or are we like a software product platform? They would just like every single day, it's like all they would talk about.
Hmm.
And I feel like our eternal debate is about like the engineer versus the end user. We typically just call that person ops, but it can be a lot of different things. But
Right.
it's like there's a lot of companies where like the ops person is the one who feels the pain point. They put in a ticket. They're like, hey, I need like a button on the page. And then, that goes through like a PM, it goes through an EM, it gets sort of load distributed across an engineering team. And like, they don't see it for like 8 weeks. And they're like, what the fuck? Like, I just need like a button to do like one super simple thing. It'll save me like 12 hours a day, because right now I'm having to go, do some, fill in the blank with like insanely manual, like complicated process.
Right.
And um, yeah, but those people like also, they're not the ones who are going to like sign off on Flank in its current state and like get it set up and configured and everything else. Um, so then on the other side, you have the engineers. Like, should we just sell directly to engineers? Some engineers do have the pain point if they're like the gatekeeper. If they're like the human run button. But like a lot of them aren't, just sort of because a lot of like modern, I think, engineering practices are sort of designed to eliminate that. But
Well, it's
yeah,
like
that's
earlier you mentioned that you I don't like Max got a bunch of CMOs on the phone.
mm-hmm.
You could get CTOs or people who do ops on the podcast and ask them where their biggest engineering bottlenecks are, and then use that to inform your strategy as you're designing for a particular use case. That could be helpful in unlocking your biggest growth.
Yeah, that's true too, and it's something that I think is another reason that I think the podcast is just a good format, is that I think there's a lot of this is just like it's just like a complicated topic, and like a lot of times it just involves even if the idea is very simple, it's like write a piece of code, get a button for it. It's like to get sort of in position to like think about it from that angle might require quite a bit of conversation, just to think about like, okay, what are our engineering bottlenecks, blah blah blah. Because like, I don't know, I find that the way I think about it is almost like the way that people's like the storage in their head is indexed. And I feel like that's why the question of like, oh, if you could wave a magic wand, like normally doesn't work as well as you think it should. It's because like nobody has like a storage part of their brain that's like, these are my magic wand ideas, because it's like if they did, they would just like request for them to get built and solve them and stuff like
You,
that. It's like,
you have to find an arbitrage opportunity. That's the
yeah,
key. Is if you can find something that like looks like it works, or you have a hypothesis for what you can run to get some growth, and you see it, you go deep on it, then you move to the next thing. I mean, nothing's going to work forever. A lot of what marketing is just trying shit and seeing if it works. Same thing with sales,
yeah.
same thing with engineering. But you gotta arb where you can. It's like finance.
No, I think that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because tomorrow there could be a new social platform for engineers, and you're the first one in the community, and you meet all these amazing engineers, and you're able to get on there. It's just staying up to date on like where people are, what communities are active, and like where your end user lives is the only consistent way that you'll be able to grow. Um, for a lot of people, that's LinkedIn, because I read some stat somewhere that like 80% of B2B inbound from social comes from LinkedIn, which is crazy.
That is
So that's
crazy.
that's where business people are, or I don't know, like B2B companies are shilling their products. I think a lot of engineers are on Twitter in terms of social. I think they're a lot on Reddit. They're a lot on Quora and like other platforms like that. And if you can be in every place at once, you should. It's not easy though. That's the difficulty, is like, where do you prioritize your.
Yeah. I've been trying to. I'm somebody who's been like just like a passive Twitter user for the past, I don't know, 10 years, whatever.
Sure.
But I'm trying to contribute to that world, but it's definitely a skill and it's kind of overwhelming.
It is. A lot of people have ghostwriters that write their tweets for them.
Yeah, that feels weird to me though.
Yeah, I don't like that. It feels inauthentic. Also, I realize we're a little over time for sure.
Yeah. I'll
How
let you run.
Yeah, I'm wondering, are you guys raising, or where are you at in the growth? Like, what are you looking to?
So I was just talking about this with my buddy. We're basically like 2 years in, and we raised like a little friends and family round at the beginning. Um,
Sure.
and the reason was that Bryson Mallory, they were like junior employees at first, and so they were both like Bryce dropped out, and then Mallory was like right out of college. So um, it's kind of an interesting makeup where like they're like kind of junior hires, but they joined like right at the beginning. But they're kind of like quasi co-founders now, and I don't know. It's a weird dynamic, but it's like pretty awesome. But
It's your founding team.
yeah, so but yeah, they needed like money to live, so we raised some money at the beginning, and
Makes sense. Yeah.
I don't. I think in some ways we're like, okay, we're at the 2 year mark, and there's some pressure to like look like this company that like we raised our friends and family, then we raised our seed. Like now it's time to we've got this core use case with this marketplace company. Like now it's time to scale it up, but I don't think that's, I don't know, like intellectually honest. And I'm just like, I think that there's still like quite a bit of experimentation and like work to do on the distribution side in particular. And like our product is like very simple, and it's just going to stay simple and very small, which I think is good. But as far as like how we want to build the company, I think we kind of just need to like keep this team really small and like raise money to go sort of figure out distribution and like try a bunch of different things, build a bunch of different tools with people. Now that we have something that can, actually like accelerate the pace at which we can build tools and build
Venture
the
can.
company that way. Sorry, go ahead.
I said venture can be dangerous too, because when you bring on a lot of investors, they want to push you to get to these numbers, and if you are still kind of in the weeds trying things out, it might not make sense early on.
Yeah, and so like I think we do want to raise again, but I also don't think we want to like basically raise another like pre-seed round or like another friends and family round, and
Sure.
not like put these expectations on the company to you know hire all these people, scale up immediately. That's I don't want to like detach from reality. Like I think we need like metrics to keep us honest and sort of chart like what it is that we're growing towards. But in terms of how we want to build a company, I think like we still just want I don't know, another year, another 2 years with like this very small team, just like experimenting quite a bit, which is longer than I would have expected when I first set out on this quest. And like I think of another 2 years doing that sort of thing, it like makes me want to cry. But I'm also just like, I don't know, given sort of what we've seen and sort of like the opportunity that we feel is there, and just being honest with ourselves about kind of like where we are, what the customer thinks about us.
Sure.
etc. It's like that's just what we need right now. So the answer
Cool.
is like.
I think you cut out a bit.
Mhm. So anyway, so like yeah, we're gonna raise at some point, like pretty soon, but I think we're still trying to figure out like exactly how to market that, given like the constraints I just described, like how we want to grow this thing. So I don't know
Yeah.
if you have any thoughts on like how we should be marketing that.
Yeah. I mean,
I'd be curious
it's
to
like
hear
I was
them.
saying. So like growth to me is a mix of your marketing efforts, your product efforts, and your sales efforts.
Yeah,
Um, you know, diving deep on a few core theses you have for your company's growth, and then just continuing to test. Early on, when you don't have money, you have to be really organic about things, but you shouldn't be trying to optimize things without creating a solid foundation. I think a lot of these companies are launching a bunch of content early on, and that's or a lot of B2B companies specifically are forgetting that the marketing content, like content marketing, SEO, having a fast website that's responsive and, you know, high performing is like very important to get traffic. Um, Doing the things like the community efforts and like the things that don't scale is the best way to grow organically. So creating that foundation and finding at least something that seems to be working in the beginning, um,
yeah,
that seems to be, you know, growing your pipeline, growing the number of calls booked on your calendar, etc. Um, but I think the key really in I admire my dad who started a company about 13 years ago, like during the last recession. He does like more hardware, so he does like security systems. He'll set up TVs. He does wiring of homes and things like that. And his business is entirely word of mouth. It took a long time to grow, but he never raised a single dollar. And it, you know, it was a grind for a long time, but everything he's done has been profitable. That's his whole thing is how can he scale the organic side? You know, making sure that his customers have the absolute best experience possible,
yeah,
showcasing all of that. If you can get a customer case study, put it on your website, that's going to be more trust behind your brand. Um, and yeah, his business is very different than like your software product that's being sold to other software companies. Um, his is more customer like consumer kind of focus, but no matter who you're selling to, you're selling to a person at the end of the day, and you have to build trust with them. So I think when it comes to growth, you have to think about what your business priorities and your business objectives are right now, and then work backward from that to run tests. So you're not going to dump a bunch of money into paid ads because it doesn't make sense for you to burn a bunch of money at this stage.
yeah,
Like, also with where things are with attribution, I don't even think it's a good idea to do paid ads that much right now anyway. Um, but really focus on finding those like organic channels. It's frustrating and it takes a long time, but having the right partners behind you is important too. Like if you could find a channel partner, for example, who like a VC, I don't know if a VC is the right channel partner, but some sort of like accelerator maybe, or VC fund who invests in software companies with X amount of engineering talent, and they show your product to their portfolio. You know, that's a certain growth channel that companies can use. I don't know if it's perfect for Flank, but um, you know, those channel partnerships are how my dad finds a lot of his business. He works with builders who build houses, and they give him a bunch.
yeah. There's there's a lot of things like that that we're like, okay, this conceptually makes sense, and like if we could find this, it seems like it would be awesome.
In
I mean,
practice. Yeah.
I know. It's just like you just gotta get out there more and like talk to more people. I think another one that always has seemed like a good fit to me is like we're we're adding the ability to. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this. So the core Flank use case is like you write code, you get a button, but like we're adding some ability to like stitch two buttons together, if that makes sense, in a very limited way.
Sure.
But like a very classic use case is like you run a query, you get a table of stuff, then you execute like an API call on each table, right?
Right.
And typically like doing the API call is sort of like where things cross into software engineering land, you know? So it's like if you could enable someone who can write SQL to like write a query and then make an API call on each of the results, whether it's an internal one or an external one, you know, like whatever, Twilio, then like that is sort of enabling people to use Twilio who otherwise like wouldn't be able to. And like we haven't built that yet, so we haven't like really explored it. But I've always just thought like, I don't know, it could be like
So
some sort of channel partnership that way.
maybe, and maybe I'm just kind of pointing in the wrong direction, which I want to avoid too. I think the best thing you can possibly do is look at the customers that you already have, the best customers for you, and figure out what other problems that they have related to this engineering challenge and try and solve that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
get them so excited about your product that they want to share it with everybody. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say the classic VC thing of like, let me know how I can be helpful, but um, I'm down to jam always. And I do work with a fund. We invest 50 to 250K checks at the pre-seed stage, agnostic on everything. Uh, I'm not going to push it down your throat, but um, yeah, let me know if you want to talk more about the growth side of things too. I'm kind of looking at marketing and sales experiments that I can do to be scrappy with another couple of B2B SaaS companies. So um, always happy to chat.
Yeah. I'd be down to keep the conversation going on either front, really. So
Cool. Yeah, I mean, for us, we're really focused on how can you put $1 in and get $3 out, as everyone is. But I want to make sure that you guys are building a business that is going to serve you well, whether you raise more venture dollars or not. Like building a profitable business, for example, or building a business that is it has a way to grow rather than yeah, just kind of throwing money at something. I think like that's a
yeah,
big problem a lot of these companies, like huge, massive, inflated tech companies have right now, is they've just been dumping money on things for years, and like the leanest teams that are doing all the scrappy experimentation are the ones that are winning.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, I do worry. I'm like, okay,
It's a lot. I mean, look, think about it from a financial perspective. You're taking on a liability whenever you take investor dollars, and you have to pick the right partners that can help you accomplish the goals that you want. So, regardless of whether you take my money or someone else's money, you have to think about how can this investor help you too. So, do they have certain connections that could boost your sales or something, or do they have engineering talent and operational experience that can help you run your company, something like that.
yeah. There is. I mean, I guess like part of the way I'm thinking about it is like if we got two more of these marketplace companies on like comparable deals, we'd basically be at like break even.
Yeah,
And I think there's like a world in which that could happen. We're at like 7.5 months of runway right now.
sure.
But I also don't want to like bet the farm on that happening and then like run out of money and like fuck the company. Um, on the flip side, I don't want to like partner with an investor who's like, oh, you guys should go out and hire like 3 salespeople, and then we like fall into that trap, and then we fuck the company that way. So I'm trying to
Okay,
just like kind of
if there's one thing
navigate like the
if there's one
path of
thing
like not fucking up the company.
I totally agree. If there's one thing I can recommend, have conviction behind hiring is like one of the most important things you could do. Like,
Yeah.
why now? Why this person? What is the business doing that warrants them joining? Especially if you're trying to stay lean. Um,
Yeah.
I I've worked with this. Like, I know this dude who he raised a seed round, and pretty much everyone at his company is part time, and I don't. He's very very hyper focused on profitability. So it is a balance, definitely. So you want to be focused on profitability. You want to be focused on getting your burn rate as low as possible, or if you're if it's high, bringing in revenue that's able to offset that. But you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot by like stalling in running your tests or hesitating to spend money to grow.
Yeah.
And so it is all a balance, and it's up to you what decisions you're going to make to try and get those levers going.
I think it's less about us and more about like the people who have just been listening to it, and like the listenership seems like most interested in like, okay, what are you guys thinking about like as a startup? Sort of like where are the problems, and me just riffing on like all the things that aren't working, I think is like good content up that alley.
You're being
Us pontificating on like GPT is maybe not. I don't know. I think it's